My mom, Daniela Riviera, was born in the early 80s. Both of her parents were baby boomers that didn't really know how to care about her or any of their other children. Before you come at me for that statement, let me remind you of just one thing. It wasn't my generation that had to have commercials that asked, "Are your children at home?" But back to what I was saying, her guardians were selfish. Which was not unlike a lot of people born during that time. To them, it was acceptable to call their children terrorists for having basic needs. As you can probably tell, they were completely complacent in the abuse that she went through. Daniela Riviera spent a majority of the nights in her childhood dreaming of better days. She spent hours staring outside her window, daydreaming. She would imagine that one day, her Prince Charming would come to save her from the dreaded Dragon's Keep. If she were to remain locked away in a tower, she hoped that maybe she could get a fairy godmother who could grant her wishes. It wasn't like her wishes were crazy. She just wanted to be free, like the birds who flew by her window. She didn't care who or what freed her. But, of course, there was always a buzzing in the back of her mind. Would the grass truly be greener on the other side? Would she really be able to make it on her own? I'd wager a good amount of money that those thoughts weren't originally hers. Someone was definitely forcing doubt between her ears. That someone fits perfectly into our little fairy tale that we have going. No princess story would be complete without an absent biological mother and an evil stepmother that took her place. Daniela's stepmother was someone straight from the minds of Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Her behavior was vile, and frankly it was inexcusable. Each action was calculated to torture and eventually break my mother's mind. Each day, Daniela was given a list of chores that was taller than she was. It was nothing like a normal chore chart. It was timed, and if she couldn't complete each task within the given time, she was violently punished. When one punishment was deemed ineffective, there was another ready to step up and take its place. That, and the other atrocities that occurred, forced my mother to start counting down the days until she could leave. She started on her 14th birthday. I don't know what happened that day that caused her to be pushed over the edge, but I do know that she went to bed that night repeating the number 1459. Counting helped her to remember that the sun would eventually come out and melt her problems away. The light would be welcomed after so many years of being locked away in the darkness. She didn't know that the solar rays would reveal a whole new set of challenges. New challenges never scared her though, she was just tired of flinching when people moved close to her. She didn't know how, or why, or when it would happen. She was just determined to make her fantasies a reality. So, she hit the ground running. My mother graduated from high school early with the intention of somehow leaving sooner than she had planned. Whether that was in the military with Uncle Sam, or in the dorms at one of the countless universities that she had been accepted to. Despite what my mother went through in the first half of her life, no one was able to steal her ambition from her. I grew up wishing that I could be like her. That I could be thrown hurdle after hurdle and somehow still manage to achieve my goals. Soon after my mother graduated high school, she got a job working at a local car dealership. My father worked there as well. He had transferred from Long Beach to my mother's town. His name played red, Alexander Lewandowski. Donnie was 18 and a semester away from starting college. On the other side, my father was much older than her, but he was very charming. But, like most men that go after younger, impressionable women, he couldn't find a lot of eager bachelorettes that were his age. With little life experience under her belt, she was easily manipulated. Weeks of grooming resulted in Daniela accepting things in their relationship that others would deem unacceptable. My biological parents got married sometime in late 2000 or early 2001. I heard the story many times growing up. It even got to a point where I stopped paying attention anytime my father's name was mentioned. I made my mind remember that they just weren't made for each other. My mother wanted my father to be like her. She hoped that eventually, he would wake up every day with the same ambition that she had. And she wanted him to go to sleep every night with dreams of a better life. She wanted to make an honorable man out of one that didn't care to meet her standards. I made a fair amount of excuses for my father's absence growing up. I wanted to believe that my father was a good person. But the same thoughts clouded my mind. How can you be a good person if you don't talk to your kid? I made up so many silly theories as to why my father wasn't around. One of the more ridiculous theories I believed was that GD owned an extensive cookbook that included the recipe for, well, everything. Page 1 was the recipe for success. Page 2, the recipe for peace. Page 3, the recipe for love. Page 4, the recipe for war. And at the very back of his cookbook was an envelope, GD's top secret recipe. His most prized possession, the recipe to make an individual. Now, I spent years trying to figure out all of the ingredients, and I got pretty close. He had to have used 1 cup of love, a liquid cup of reason, 2 cups of empathy, a tablespoon of bravery, a pinch of enthusiasm, and of course, a sprinkle of ambition. Other things go into making a person, but like I said, GD's recipe was top secret. Sometimes, GD got curious or bored and added other ingredients. Things like greed, hatred, aggression, arrogance, and dishonesty. Maybe GD added a splash of the other stuff into the mixing bowl meant for my father. Maybe the ingredients were just expired. I could speculate for eternity, but I would never know why my father was the way that he was. As I alluded to, my mother and father didn't work out. She expected the bare minimum from the relationship, but quickly found out that they did not see eye to eye on those standards. It seemed like Alexander didn't care about his future. He indulged in the now. He would get several credit cards, max them out, and never pay them off. It would fall off his credit in 7 years, so was it really that big of a deal? He wanted my mother to follow him down the easy path. He kind of saw Daniela as a meal ticket, while my mother saw him as her potential future. I would love to say that my father eventually cleaned up his act for my mom. I wish I could claim that one day he woke up and said to himself that he had to become a better man. I would also love to say that my mother gave Alexander an ultimatum. Meet my standards or leave. Do better for yourself or I'll leave. In all honesty, she might have said something like that to him. I happen to know that she didn't follow through, though. The marriage was doomed from the start. He proposed quickly in the relationship. It wasn't a celebration, like my mother had always wanted. There was almost no planning put into it. My mother just wanted flowers and a walk on the beach. She didn't care about some huge diamond ring that would have been a plus, though. It happened randomly in the car one day. He turned to her and said, "Daniela, I think it's time we get married." His voice was flat. No real love was detectable in his words. He hadn't even turned the radio down. "Are you proposing to me right now?" My mother questioned him with a look of bewilderment plastered on her face. Obviously. Why else would I bring up marriage? She accepted it. I often thought about why she accepted it. Maybe if she had grown up in a loving home, she would have known what healthy affection and respect looked like. Sometimes I wish that she would have kicked him out of her car. Yes, it was her car, but she let him drive it. She didn't want him to feel inadequate as a man, so she always let him drive her car. Sometimes I wish that she would have driven home to the apartment that she paid for, packed his stuff, and threw it on the lawn. My mother wanted me to have a better life than she did. One where I was respected by my partner. My mother always told me between drags of her cigarette, if a man, or a woman, or whoever the fuck you end up with, proposes to you in the car, you better dump their ass. If they can't be bothered to go out of their way to buy you a dozen roses and light a few candles, they aren't worth it. And they certainly don't think that you're worth it. My mother wanted to save up a bit of money to have a nice wedding ceremony. Her father had even given the new couple $1,000 to go towards their wedding. Alexander decided that the two would be wed at the courthouse to save money. My mother gave in to avoid upsetting the man-child that she called her significant other. So, Daniela became pregnant with me sometime after their wedding. Now, I was born in March, albeit a little early. I was still able to go back 9 months on a calendar. Imagine my disgust when I realized that my father's birthday was in June. I was the result of birthday sex. Barf. My father left us sometime after Thanksgiving in 2001. She spent the last 4 months of her pregnancy on her own. When the day finally came for me to escape my mother's uterus, she labored for 53 hours. No, she never once let me forget about it. Shortly after her favorite ray of sunshine was born, Anthony, Daniela found out about the existence of my father's other children and his child support debt. She was devastated. Not because she didn't want to be a stepmother, but because she didn't know that she technically was one. Totally coincidentally, my parents didn't get divorced until my father's child support debt was paid. While my parents were separated, my mother met a new guy named Fernando. They decided that I needed to have a sibling that was close enough to my age. So my brother Anthony was born at the end of 2003. Obviously, he was my half-brother. He and I were almost Irish twins. Almost. But Fernando ended up leaving us. So, she was left alone, yet again. Unlike our fathers, she stepped up to raise us. My brother and I always had food on the table, even if that meant that she didn't. We had all of the material things. Our bills were always paid. Let's give a big kudos to my mom. She made it on her own with 2 kids in Southern California. I couldn't imagine doing that. We had toys and clothes, but that meant that my mom worked a lot. I couldn't fault her for that. She had to do what she had to do to take care of 2 little kids. That's not to say that I wasn't grateful for any and all of the sacrifices she made. I didn't know about a lot of them until I was nearly grown up. The babysitters were pretty cool. My favorite one was named Frankie. He was a goth guy, and he taught me how to tie my shoes. The people didn't stop me from feeling a weird emptiness, though. No one could fill my father's role. I always wanted my dad there. No matter how much he didn't like my mom. He was still my father. Maybe I was a little selfish for that. I thought that if I wished hard enough, he would come back. I thought he would be a changed man, and my parents would get back together. I wished that he would abandon his other family instead of us. What was so wrong with us? Why were we his dirty secret? My mom was kind. She tried to spread goodness into the world. I was just a kid. I couldn't have done anything wrong to him. I wanted to have a set of grandparents to go with on the weekends. I wanted my family to be the family that everyone envies. The one that lives in the nice house on the end of the street, with the white picket fence. I knew that my mother needed that too. She craved a healthy relationship with a man that would love her until the end of time. She needed someone who would die for her, but she always seemed to end up with men that were determined to kill the person that she was. I never knew if my childhood was boring or entirely fucked up, because I never remembered most of it. Occasionally, I'd get snippets that would pass through my mind just as fast as they'd appear. It seemed to me that these recollections had to be from a movie, a television show, or a book. They couldn't have been my life. Right? For as long as I could actually remember, I had rarely been in control of the events in my life, and for as long as I can remember, it drove me batshit bonkers.